When it comes to the price of silver, I've talked a bit in recent videos how it's perhaps been something of a frustrating time. We're seeing plenty of, I suppose, week-to-week volatility, but no real change. If we look at where silver's trading now, $25.40, that sort of area, we're pretty much back to where we were towards the end of December. But there are still opportunities out there in individual silver stocks. So let's take a look at some of those. It has been something of a flat year for the price of silver. It ended last year around $26.35. The price at the moment is about $1 lower than that. I think we do have a couple of trades running on silver. So from previous videos we did, 1st of March and the 16th of Feb, they're underwater at the moment, those couple of trades, as the price just sort of flip-flops around. We've got stops in protecting them. But I thought, let's take a look at some individual silver stocks, because they do perform slightly differently, some of them, even though clearly they are tied to an extent to the fortunes of silver. So in this video, we'll take a look at 4 different stocks, including an ETF, an exchange-traded fund, and see if perhaps they offer more promising potential than the price of silver does at the moment. Hello, I'm David Jones from Capital.com, and I thought we'd take a look at individual silver stocks, do an update on some of the ones we looked at. I think it was back in November, around the time of the US presidential election. I've said, in recent weeks that silver has been quite a boring market, fairly sideways, but there are other ways of gaining exposure to silver and its fortunes. So let's take a look at some individual stocks. So as usual, in this video, talk a bit about them, then we'll jump backwards and forwards onto the trading platform and take a look at things in more detail and see if there's any opportunities there. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, if you could subscribe, it helps support the channel. Plus, of course, we're now doing live streams on a Friday. They're proven to be very popular. 2:30 in the afternoon UK time, just as the US markets are opening. If you're subscribed with the alarm bell notification clicked, you get a message off YouTube as we're about to go live and look at all of these different markets in real time. Right, let's get things started and take a look at some of these silver stocks. So the first one we're going to take a look at is Pan American Silver. They're listed on the NASDAQ, US listing, and they are the world's second largest primary silver producer. We had earnings out for Pan American back in February of this year, and I think that they were pretty good. They came in at 57 cents a share, which was at least 20% better than what the market was expecting. So good numbers from Pan American. But as ever, the fortunes of these companies are tied to what's going on with the price of silver. If silver is weak, it's still quite hard for a lot of these companies' share price to make much headway. And we're seeing that in the performance for the year to date. If you bought Pan American at the end of last year, you're down around 6% for the year to date for the share price. But I do wonder, I think like last time, are they building a base? We've seen the share price under some pressure this year, but I do wonder what the price action that we're seeing since about November of last year, are we seeing them in the process of building a base? Let's take a look on the platform, take a look at the charts and see where there could be an opportunity here. So here's Pan American, and you can see it's not been the most exciting time since the August highs last year for silver were matched by the move in the Pan American share price, trading up to $40. And since then, it's just been banging around in what has been a pretty wide range, well underpinned on the downside since late November of last year, around $28. So I think it's still an interesting one. I think on weakness below 30, we can see the price doesn't spend that long down there. So if I was looking to be a buyer at the moment, at the time of recording, it closed the previous day around $32 a share. So I don't think there's too much interesting for me in this one at the moment. But if it slipped below 30, I think it looks like potentially an interesting trading buy. I think clearly what we need here is the price of silver to wake up and find a little bit of momentum. So a buyer on dips below 30, looking really for the price to run back up to the mid-30s. I think if we lost this $28 a share mark, we'd have to worry about much deeper sell-offs. But it's been a fairly uneventful few months, but perhaps we are seeing a base being built here. The next one we're going to look at, it's not an individual company, it's an ETF, an exchange-traded fund. It's the iShares Silver Trust. The code is SLV. This always ignites, I think, plenty of discussion because, of course, this is paper silver. It's a way of getting exposure to the price of silver, but you're not actually buying the physical metal. You're buying an exchange-traded fund that tracks the price of silver. And whether you like the idea of paper silver or not, exchange-traded funds are really popular. It's a way of gaining exposure to a particular market, in this instance, silver. So broadly speaking, it should track the ups and downs and the fortunes of the silver market. On our platform, clients tend to just trade the price of silver as an asset anyway, so we don't actually cover the iShares Silver Trust. We can see the movements from looking at the price of silver. But let's take a look on a third-party platform at iShares Silver and how it's been doing. So here's the iShares Silver Trust. Pretty much, of course, doing what it's meant to do, tracking the price of silver. So ended 2020 up around $25. Sold off. We're slightly down again for the year. We had that excitement in early Feb as we saw the price of silver gap higher. We saw the iShares Silver Trust follow it higher too. But like silver, just somewhat stuck in a sideways range at the moment. I think it's a way of gaining exposure for longer term investors. It's still very much an interesting one. We have these lows matching up from a time period point of view for silver, the lows in September and the lows in late November ahead of $20. In the short term, at least, perhaps we still have this correction going on from the 1st of February high. So again, like with silver, I think there's the risk of more pressure, but nothing to get too excited about in this one. The same as pretty much the silver price at the moment. But I think some of the other stocks that we're going to look at next could have a bit more potential. Let's take a look now at First Majestic. It's a miner focused on production in Mexico. We did look at this back in November last year. And actually, if we looked at the sector as a whole, at the time of looking at it back then, it had been one of the poorer performers overall. In a year where we saw plenty of volatility for silver, we saw the share price of First Majestic under some pressure for a lot of the year. But this year has been somewhat different, to say the least. We've seen loads of volatility for the First Majestic price. End of Jan into early Feb, over the course of a few days, we saw the price jump by around about 70%. And if you cast your mind back then, it was just after all of the GameStop fun and games, Reddit, Wall Street Bets. One of the rumors or the chat was that silver was the next target. So we saw some of these silver companies jump, and First Majestic was one of them. So a phenomenal run over a few days. It has given up gains since then, but year to date, if you bought First Majestic end of 2020, you're still up about 24% year to date. So it's been a cracking performance against perhaps a more disappointing performance for silver. The last earnings we had for First Majestic were out in February. Next ones come out in May. So let's take a look. Now things have calmed down since that volatility in sort of late Jan, early Feb. What does the share price look like? Does it look like a buy down here? So here's First Majestic. You can see the impact on that share price end of January. So if we have a look, the 27th of January, it closed at $13.85. And then by the 1st of February, it had nearly touched $24. Massive burst of volatility. But let's take a step back and put this into context. I think it's interesting that we do have, if we go back to the lows of last year, March last year, when the shares were trading briefly below $5, I think we've got a good trend in place. I mean, clearly we had that burst of volatility in late Jan, but looking at where we've got the trend line coming in now, around or just above $12 a share. Good support again from late December into early Jan, around about 12. So even if we did see the share price of First Majestic under pressure from here, I still think it's a buying opportunity. We saw recent support late March around $14.50 a share. So whilst if we saw the price of silver under some pressure, we could see the price of First Majestic drift. To me, any dips towards that 12, 14 area look like a buying opportunity. So I think this is definitely one of the more interesting ones to watch at the moment. The final one we'll take a look at is Wheaton Precious Metals. They are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, but also last year they got listed on the London Stock Exchange. So if you're a UK investor who prefers to trade on your home exchange, you can buy and sell Wheaton shares in London, or of course trade them with us via CFDs or spread bets on our platform. They are one of the world's largest streaming companies for precious metals. So it doesn't mean they are the Spotify of the precious metals world, but what streaming companies do, and there are a few of these. We looked at one when we talked about gold stocks recently. They don't actually operate or own any mines. In effect, they provide mining companies with capital to explore and produce, and the streaming companies like Wheaton commit to purchasing a certain proportion, if not all, of the metals found in those mines. So it's quite an interesting play on production and, of course, the price of the precious metals involved. The last earnings for Wheaton, we saw earnings per share of 33 cents. This was slightly below expectations, so a bit of a disappointment for the market. For the year so far, the share price is broadly unchanged, so very little change year to date, although the price has been under pressure since those August 2020 highs for silver. Are things about to change? Are we going to see the trend change for Wheaton? Let's take a look on the platform. So here's silver Wheaton, so Wheaton Precious Metals. I think what's really interesting here, this trend line that's in place here, is one that was there the last time we looked at it, which would have been November of last year when we had the US presidential election. We were looking at the stocks around then, and you can see what a great job it's done and continues to do. You know, it rallied up to it in the last couple of days, and we've seen it fall away. So I suppose if you wanted to go short Wheaton at the moment, it's an interesting level up here because we've pushed back to that trend line. Looking at the RSI down here, it's overbought as well. So there's a lot to say that perhaps in the short term, the risk is for a trip back to those early March lows around $35, $36 a share. But I think where it does get interesting is if we see this trend line finally cracked. You know, it may take some strength in the precious metals to do this. But I think if we saw the Wheaton share price starting to trade through sort of 42, which also ties up with the highs in early September, I think we have the start of a trend reversal. So for me at the moment, it's one to keep an eye on. It's still under some pressure. Obviously, we can see it here with this trend line in place. But if we do see some strength and a move through 42, it looks like sentiment is starting to shift and it starts to get a bit more interesting. So I think it's an interesting one to come back to in the next month or so to see if we can finally crack this downtrend. That's it for this update in silver stocks. We'll come back to them in a few months' time and see how they're faring. But for now, from me, David Jones and Capital.com, we'll leave things there. Good luck with your trading. For more trading videos just like this, please subscribe to our channel.